So we know autophagy is important, this cellular sort of recycling, but there's ways that we can increase it. And there's a interesting study that you and I were talking about where autophagy was increased quite significantly based on people's like VO2 max and certain things like that. It was really wild. So I'll kind of let you explain that, and maybe we can strategize ways for the viewers and the listeners to be able to implement this kind of stuff to get more autophagy out of their day.
Yeah, this to me, Thomas, is incredibly fascinating. And in essence, this study found that the more physically fit individuals are, they get greater levels of autophagy when they fast, irrespective of the time of the duration of the fast. So in brief, this clinical study randomized people based upon their VO2 max, and that's how they were able to determine their level of fitness. And they measured the biomarkers of the autophagy initiation proteins every 12 hours. So all of the study subjects fasted for 36 hours, and they measured markers like ATG1, ATG3. There's all these little proteins within our cells that need to amplify to kickstart, as you mentioned, the cellular recycling process. And what they found is at every time point throughout the fast, the people who regularly exercised compared to people who didn't exercise, and again, these were stratified based upon their VO2 max levels. So they earned a high VO2 max or earned a low VO2 max. The people who are physically fit and who regularly exercised had 40% greater levels of autophagy at every time point throughout the fast, even starting at just 12 hours. So I think the take home here is for the average person who is trying to do a 72-hour fast because they heard of one study finding that that is the magic number of hours you need to fast to increase autophagy, might find some solace or benefit of knowing that you don't have to fast that long if you are also a regular exerciser, because if you regularly exercise, you will increase your VO2 max and you will fine tune your metabolic machinery so that when you fast, you get into the fasted state much more quickly. And it turns out because exercise too increases autophagy, it will increase concomitantly faster when you actually just do an 18-hour fast or even a 24-hour fast. So I think it's helpful for people to understand that when they go for walks or when they go to the gym, they're making their fasting machinery more efficient when they do actually embark on a 24-hour or a 36-hour fast.
After today's video, I put a link down below for LMNT electrolytes, and now, in case you haven't seen it, they have their sparkling electrolytes, like an actual can, a ready-to-drink can of electrolytes in a sparkling fashion. So it tastes like a soda, but you're getting the electrolyte effect. So if you're in a caloric deficit, you're trying to cut, or you're trying to build muscle but stay lean at the same time, these things are amazing because you can sip on them during your workout and it feels like you're sipping on a soda, but you can also sip on it throughout the day and it just tastes really good. But they still have the same 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium. Totally fasting friendly. They won't break a fast. You could have them before your fasted workout. They also have their regular packs, which of course I still use all the time. Like that's my baseline. But anyway, that link down below gets you a free variety pack with any purchase. So free variety pack. All you got to do is make a purchase and you get a sample variety pack with each flavor. So you got like a citrus salt, which is like lemon lime. You've got a watermelon salt. You've got a grapefruit salt, all these really good flavors. So that link, go to drinklmnt.com/Thomas, drinklmnt.com/Thomas, and it's in the top line of this description. Make sure you check out their sparkling flavors.
That's interesting because we see a lot of people that just elect to fast in an effort to not exercise, right? It's easier sometimes to fast than it is to go out and exercise. Exercise involves movement and hard work, and it can be laborious and it can hurt, and it's not always comfortable. It's generally not supposed to be comfortable, but it sounds like, just those little contributions can have a tremendous magnitude on the effects of a fast.
This study, and there's multiple other related studies as well, but I like to point this one out because again, it looked at autophagy every 12 hours over the course of 36 hours. And it wasn't until hour 36 that the sedentary individuals started to see appreciable amounts of autophagy increase. So this is the question a lot of people want to know is how long do I need to fast to get appreciable amounts of increased levels of autophagy within my cells that can help with longevity, maybe cancer prevention and so forth? Well, the ultimate question is it depends upon how much you exercise. If you regularly exercise, you will get much more out of your 24 or 36 hours of fasting compared to if you don't habitually exercise. So if you care about if you want to maximize the efficiency and the benefits of fasting, you should really prioritize recreational exercise.
Two things. Okay, so first off, you said a 40% increase at pretty much all time markers. So, autophagy is increasing throughout the fast anyway. So we're talking a 40% increase above what's already increasing at a decent rate anyway. I think autophagy increases quite significantly up to about 24 hours, and then it starts to level off, and then I think it kind of goes up quite a bit again to like 72 hours, and then it kind of levels. So it still goes up, but it levels off a little bit. Like 72 is kind of like, say, like the line of diminishing return in a lot of places. But point is that we're knocking 40% above each already like incremental increase.
Right.
So that's pretty significant. The other piece that I want to talk about and I want to kind of double click on is the VO2 max piece here, because I love VO2 max to begin with, because it's just, there's no two ways about it. Like VO2 max is your work. Like it is your work. Like it's literally measuring like your work. And there's not a lot of situations where someone's putting like a minimal amount of effort in and achieving monumental changes in their VO2 max, right? It's like a clear litmus test for someone's physical fitness, but also just their effort and their time and their work. But I think that more stuff needs to come out helping people understand that there's a correlation as well between VO2 max, longevity, which we talk about, but even in our ability to oxidize fat, right? Like if you have a higher VO2 max, your ability to oxidize fat is better as well. Like you're usually a better fat burning machine, so to speak, if you're fit, which sounds kind of obvious, but then when you break it down, it's not so obvious. Like someone that's already fit, okay, does that mean that they're like more efficient at burning fat? Why would they be more efficient at burning fat? Well, because their systems and processes know how to turn those things over quicker. There's the ability to oxidize fat at a potentially higher intensity, which is something that I've experienced personally. I'll talk about in a little bit, but I find it interesting with this particular study, talking like, okay, so each increase in VO2 max, was there more? So when you say a 40% increase of their autophagy, was that at the highest VO2 max that they kind of measured, or was it incremental based on someone's VO2 max?
Yeah, great question. I believe it's just because they stratified people in two different buckets: low VO2 max and self-reported non-exercisers versus self-reported exercisers with a higher VO2 max. So, and these were VO2 max relative to one's age as well. So this was adjusted for their age. And again, the people that had higher VO2 maxes because they earned it, as you just said, they have been exercising habitually. They had significantly greater amounts of autophagy initiation proteins and autophagy biomarkers, suggesting that this activity that we know to be activated during exercise is also having carryover in the domain of fasting, which is what we want. So I think they're complementary, exercise and fasting.
Do you think, autophagy can kick in pretty quick? And that's a common question. It's like, how quickly does autophagy kick in? This is a great way to talk about that. It's like, well, it depends on how fit you are. Because one could actually argue that you're probably starting to have a certain level of autophagy happening shortly after your stomach's empty, right? But if you have a higher VO2 max, it's going to make it so that potentially you're getting into that state faster. So perhaps even when you're not officially fasting, just an overnight fast or, 6 hours between meals, maybe you're actually starting to dip your toe in that autophagy water a little bit before you otherwise would.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think probably if we zoom out, autophagy is probably happening at all times in different cells and tissues in the body. It's just a degree of proportions. And as we get more physically fit, metabolically fit from fasting and exercise, respectively, then we just make this process more efficient in terms of how it functions. And I think a related study that is noteworthy is a group in Sweden actually looked at levels of proteins that are released in lifelong exercisers based upon their exercise subtype. So they looked at sedentary controls, they looked at 15-year endurance trained athletes, both men and women, and 15-year strength trained athletes. And they wanted to see at baseline, after doing a muscle biopsy, after no exercise, do the muscles of lifelong athletes or 15-year-long athletes, do they release different proteins at rest compared to sedentary controls? They wanted to see, because we're hearing so much more about muscle now. Muscle is this organ linked with longevity. It's a glucose and insulin sponge, et cetera, myokines, exerkines. So they wanted to really look at this from a genomics and proteomics level. And what is genomics? What is proteomics? It's a way of looking at how our genes are making proteins. And those proteins, of course, affect the function of our cells in our body. And it was really interesting. The investigators found there was 680 different proteins that were increased in the endurance trained athletes compared to the sedentary controls. In the strength trained athletes, there was like 400 and some odd number of proteins that were differentially expressed and increased compared to the sedentary control. So it turns out exactly going back to what you said with VO2 max, you have to earn that. And through that, the adaptations that occur through consistent training create all these cellular and molecular changes that are favorable within the muscle. But what I thought was really even more interesting is 92% of these proteins were related to mitochondrial function. Mitophagy, the subspecialized autophagy that helps clear damaged and deranged mitochondria. So there's all sorts of different types of autophagy. We speak about it as though it's one thing, but it's highly specialized within the cell, and which organelle is being broken down. It turns out your mitochondria are really susceptible to damage because they are the engines of our cells, and so they can accumulate exhaust and die. Just like an old car might leak exhaust, when you start it up. Well, you need those organelles, the mitochondria, to undergo this specialized process of autophagy known as mitophagy, and exercise is really efficient at doing that. And so, going back to the study, again, 92% of these proteins, we're talking about over 600 proteins, 92% of them were related to mitochondria. So when you exercise, you are fine-tuning your mitochondria, and that translates into reductions in cancer, better metabolic health, better cognitive function. The list goes on. I mean, I think there's not a disease that can be linked to mitochondrial dysfunction that we can talk about. So it's really, really important. And it turns out that endurance exercise is a great tool to do that. And I think that helps reframe the conversation for people, because I like to go to the gym and do compound movements just like anyone else. But I also I run more, I hike more, do sprints, do interval training, do all these different types of exercises that improve my aerobic capacity and capillary density. And I think that is really important for longevity.
What's you said there was 400 and some odd in the strength group and 600 and some odd in the endurance group.
Yeah.
Do we know what the percentage of overlap there was? Like, were those 400 from the strength group encompassed in the endurance group, or was it 400 different ones, right? So if you have a strength athlete and an endurance athlete, and also what did they classify as an endurance athlete?
Yeah, these were people who did endurance-based events competitively, and I think this was like swimming, running, triathlons, and things like that. And then the strength-based group was more powerlifters, weightlifters. I might be considered more in that category if I was, part of the clinical study. But yeah, the overlap was interesting, and this was more in diagrammatic form that I can see. And then I was reading the text because I was actually in Scandinavia recently, so I was really interested in the study and the researchers. So maybe I can share the study with you. You can show it on the screen and see. But there was a lot of overlap for sure between the two. But I think there was just if we want to enumerate the amount of proteins that are released from the muscle, it sounds counterintuitive, but it seems that endurance-trained muscle actually releases more favorable proteins than just strength training. That's not to say that only do endurance exercise, but it seems that endurance exercise is quite powerful for how it affects the skeletal muscle as well as the cardiorespiratory system. And that's why we see the VO2 max being such an important indicator of cardiorespiratory health. And we improve that, of course, by way of HIIT training and endurance training. So it's fascinating stuff.
I mean, it comes back to what you and I were talking about on our hike this morning. It's like, okay, well, wait a minute. What if there's more mass, more muscle from strength training, and you're also, we're seeing there's a big influx, I don't want to call it a movement, but a huge interest in like the hybrid athlete right now, with high rocks and all this stuff. Like a lot more people are doing both.
Right.
Like it's like it's happening before our eyes, because it seems like a couple of years ago, like you were either a strength athlete or you're a runner or this or that. Like you're now having people that are embracing both sides of it. And I've been beating that drum for a long time as someone that does both. And I feel like there's huge benefit there. But do you think if they were to have an additional cohort, an additional arm of that, where they were looking at people that did both, would you, in your experience, would you anticipate even higher number? Or do you think it's capped out just with the endurance work?
I think you might see additive effects, the synergy of both, like you mentioned, the hybrid athlete for sure. Because, one of the shortcomings of endurance athletes is they don't strength train. Generally, I'm not saying all, but a lot of endurance athletes just train for their sport, very specific. And I understand that. My daughter's an All-American runner, and I try to get her to strength train, but none of her peers strength train at all.
Now, if you view it as taking away from your specialty, then it's really hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah, it's like all power to weight ratio in endurance sports. But there's obviously value to, there's life outside of athletics, so strength training I think is important for bone mineral density, for hormones, for all of that. So to your point, I think there would be a hybrid approach, a synergistic approach. And this is what I found, like you, I see rucking, doing long runs, hikes. I love all that. And I find when I'm doing that endurance-based work, I actually put on better muscle. Mm-hmm. I feel leaner. And I just wonder if I'm just more metabolically healthy. I'm able to get, branched chain amino acids and carnitine and creatine, all the nutrients that you need to induce muscle growth and hypertrophy. You're just more healthy from a metabolic perspective, from a cardiorespiratory perspective. And so I don't find that if I'm eating sufficient to offset the calorie deficit from exercise, that I'm able to also put on or get the best gains that I possibly can from the gym. So I think that the hybrid approach for sure is the way to go. And so I think, if people can incorporate this into their life, they might just do supersets or drop sets. Instead of sitting on your phone at the gym in between sets, go for a walk or go for a rec outside, then come back. And I often do that at my gym. So just incorporating more of this into your training already is an easy way to do it without having to add on more time to your week to do both. You can incorporate this within the gym type setting.
Yeah, man. It's everything you're talking about. Most people that are watching or viewing have probably heard of EPOC, like sort of the post-exercise kind of oxygen consumption that happens, right? And like how there's an afterburn effect from a fat loss perspective. And it's almost as though we can go beyond that and say that this is like sort of the metabolic or systemic long-term epoch, right? It's like, because you think about, okay, if someone is a consistent exerciser, they have a good VO2 max, they're simple, like at rest benefit, independent of calories, independent of just general metabolic health as we think of it in the layperson terms, like really just the actual benefits that are occurring. I use this term a lot, but you're just kind of marinating in your own benefit, right? Like, so you've got this muscle on you, you worked out, you have a high VO2 max, just being at rest, you're getting all these additional benefits. And I think right now it's kind of common theme that like, if you're not moving, then it's not like working and doing something for you. Mm-hmm. Like it feels like one of the best investments that you can have is going to be muscle mass and VO2 max. Like those two things just continue to pay dividends short and long term.
100% agree. And I recommend all my clients use power as an output when they're doing any sort of endurance or cardio-based training, as opposed to just looking at their heart rate. And so on the ski erg, on the Concept 2, even on a Stairmaster, Stair Mill exercise bike, you want to look at watts as an output and train for watts, train for power. Because your heart rate may vary based upon your sleep, based upon your life load, your calorie burn. So start to really focus on power and strength. And so, I've had a lot of clients who are like, well, I do 20 minutes at this heart rate on the Peloton. And I say, well, what is your power? I'm a former competitive cyclist. Like we used a power meter. Lance Armstrong won multiple Tour de France's because he trained for power to rate ratio. That was it. So he's like, really nice guy. Oh, I don't know what my power is. Like, okay, get back to me in a week. He's putting out 120 watts on a Peloton, which is nothing. Like this is not. I'm like, Mike, we're gonna have to bump this up, man. You're a strong guy. We got to put more into it. So this zone 2 stuff, I think there's some benefit there to building the capillary density, the long, slow distance, maybe once a week. But you got to wrap it up, increase the intensity and increase that power, because strength really, really matters. And you talk to people, when they're elderly, why do people fall? We think it's the low bone mineral density. It probably is the neuromuscular connection and the lack of strength that is the reason why people fall, not because of other factors. So the strength really matters along with the VO2 max. Really important.
I mean, zone 2 is called building base for a reason, right? I think that I'm all for zone 2. But if we take it as to like, building base doesn't mean that becomes your life. Building base means this is your base. This has become your new baseline. Yeah. So if sitting on the couch was your previous base, then your zone 2 has now become your base, meaning that zone 2 is just your starting point. Like you are changing your base so that when you come down, you're able to rest and recover at your zone 2 heart rate similarly than you would if you were sitting down, not like literally. But the point is there, like when I was talking to, Chris Hinshaw, I mean, he explained it so eloquently. It's just like you're making it so that you can recover more from higher intensity activity at a slightly higher heart rate because you've reestablished base. And you know this as a competitive cyclist. So it's like anyone that has gone through any kind of endurance block knows that like kind of the introductory phase is, yes, you rebuild base. You do rebuild that base. But there are benefits there. The problem is just like anything we've talked about in other videos. It's like you find benefits in something and you become myopic and look at those benefits and then all other things go out the window. But zone 2, like for me, I've gotten on the zone 2 train before and my VO2 max goes down.
Yep.
And I hate to say it, but there's no real way to look at someone's zone 2 in a metabolic score or any kind of objective marker, you could say, hey, you do X amount of zone 2 and you have a reduction in all-cause mortality. That is the case with VO2 max. Like, it's pretty freaking clear. So like, if I look at someone's VO2 max versus how much zone 2 they tell me they do, like, I'm going to look at their VO2 max as the best predictive indicator, right? So there's no two ways about it, in my opinion. I feel like you have to do the work, you have to have the high intensity, or at least the moderate intensity is tremendous at building VO2 max too, but it has to be above just that zone 2.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think you and I both measure our VO2 maxes pretty regularly. I started 2 years. When I hit 40, I was like, I'm going to do this every year. And I've progressively increased my VO2 max every single year. As I've gotten older, and I've done 0 zone 2 training, not once. That doesn't mean I don't go for walks, or don't go for hikes or things like that, but no intentionality. It's like more exercise, more strength training, more HIIT training, concept 2, ski erg, hiking in the summer, rucking with really no structure. So, but have focus on the intensity, short duration intensity, not prolonged, but it's like that really helps to build up I think you're like you said, reestablish the base, and all that.
You probably are one of these people, and I know I'm one of them. Like, I go from zone 1 to 3. Like 2 is 2. I have to make a concerted effort to be at 2. And it's a range where it feels like, it's going to sound bad, but it feels like kind of a waste of time, because I'm like, I would rather either go for a walk at zone 1 for a long period of time and actually be able to be functional and do something and talk on the phone, or I'd rather just bump it up to zone 3 and actually get a little more VO2 max benefit. But it's interesting, and I said I'd come back to this. Like, I did a video on this specifically when I did my VO2 max test with Andy Galpin. I didn't get to crossing that at 1 RER, meaning I was oxidizing fat pretty much like 95% of my VO2 max test. I didn't cross that 1 until it was far into my test, and I didn't really cross it until I was in the post-exercise, so like when you're recovering. And what that means in layman's terms for people that are watching is that I was oxidizing fat even at a pretty damn high intensity. I mean, VO2 max, you're testing this max, it's all out. And I was oxidizing fat at a really high rate. And not to say that that's not normal. I just don't think it's looked at a whole lot in people that have conditioned themselves with like a lot of fasted training and things like that. My point in saying all of this is that you can potentially change the intensity at which you burn fat. Like, if normally most people would probably cross that 1 RER at like, I don't know, probably 70% of the way through their VO2 max test or something like that, where they become glycolytic and they're using more carbohydrates. The benefit to using more fat at a higher intensity, I mean, I can think of a couple of reasons, but for one, I would be able to sustain a higher intensity for longer periods of time because I have more fat available than carbohydrates available. So I could sustain that for a long period of time. But also from a body composition perspective, it means that I could probably go do some like moderate intensity intervals, and where most people would start oxidizing, more in the way of carbohydrates, I'm probably at least having a direct line to fat. Not to say that going glycolytic is going to be problematic or going to slow down fat loss, but it means if I'm trying to get more granular about the percentage of fat that I'm utilizing as fuel, I have a lot more like slack, a lot more amnesty with that range.
Totally. And you're just more efficient, what it comes down to. And if we'd like to even get more granular here, we talked about autophagy and mitophagy. You're able to oxidize those fats through the mitochondria, and that is the organelle within our cells that is linked with all these different beneficial health outcomes. Lack of healthy mitochondria is tethered to a lot of dis-ease. So the more efficiently you can burn fat at exercise, that just is a proxy and a reflection of your good metabolic health and good mitochondrial health. So I think, that should be a goal most people should strive for, because if we think about it, what's the average person needs, the perception is, oh my gosh, once I go to the gym, I have to have Gatorade, I have to have sugar. When I used to do competitive cycling, like everyone was carb loading, just that. And like, I got into paleo back then, and I would often start my races fasted, and then just start a little bit of dried fruit, or I'd make these energy bars, home with nuts and seeds and things like that. So anyway, you're just much more efficient for longer, and you don't have the crashes. I think, to put a bow on this, we want to prevent that variability in blood glucose. And so when you're utilizing fats and ketones for fuel, you don't have this wide swing in the variability. That's what creates the adrenal activation and cortisol and noradrenaline and the insulin surges. We want to compress that variability. So the more that we can make our fat burning machinery more efficient, we have a reduction in glycemic variability, which I think is a really important goal we should all strive for.
It's a really good way to put it. Yeah, it's like every time you have this kind of undulation, you're like dipping your toe in and out of the water versus kind of that consistency that you're looking for. Yeah. Well, Mike, where can everyone find you, man?
Yeah, Thomas, thanks for having me on. My website is called highintensityhealth.com, and my YouTube channel is also High Intensity Health over on YouTube.
Right on, brother. Thanks,
Thank you.